9 o'clock in the morning. Kiev, Ukraine. The capital city lives its everyday life. People are rushing to work, scrolling through news bulletins and weather on smartphones. Nothing portends trouble. But an international problem is looming on the horizon, which will bring huge financial losses around the world. And all this will happen literally in one day. In Kiev, there is a 4-story headquarters of a small family-owned Ukrainian business, producing software products for electronic document management. On the 3rd floor of this building, there is a server room, in which there is a set of equipment connected to each other by network cables, marked with hand-signed tags. On a typical day, these servers issue routine updates, bug fixes, security patches, new features. All of them are designed for accounting software called MED, or just Honey, as it is lovingly called in Ukraine. This program is installed on almost every computer in the country from which tax returns are filed, or business processes are conducted in the country. According to information security specialists, the company at that time had about 400,000 customers, which was about 90% of all organizations in the country. But it is on the 27th of June that these computers will become the starting point for the most destructive cyberattack since the invention of the Internet, the epicenter of which will be the update of Medoc. It is from there that the source code of one of the most famous ransomware viruses of recent years will be launched. The update server was compromised and was used for the primary distribution of malware. A similar infection was carried out a month earlier, on the 18th of May, 2000 of the 17th year, when the distributed application Medoc was infected with a ransomware cryptographer X-date about 11 o'clock in the morning. The mass distribution of the modification of the program began. The virus spread like wildfire, exploiting vulnerabilities in Windows and old holes in network protocols. So, what did an ordinary computer user see when the virus was acting? The Medoc program update was being installed. Along with it, a virus got into the system, which used a known vulnerability in the SEM Eternal Blue protocol to fix it in the system. Then, the virus encrypted the contents of the hard disk, permanently destroyed the original files, and issued a message about a delayed restart of the computer after 1 or 2 hours, ostensibly to complete the update installation process. After the reboot, the user saw a black screen with a message. If you see this message, your files are no longer available. At the same time, the virus attempted to search for vulnerable computers on the local network, and further infected all nearby computers through the Eternal Blue vulnerability. To recover data, the creators of the virus offered to transfer an amount of $300 in Bitcoin equivalent from each computer to a Bitcoin wallet. A few hours after the attack begins, transactions that are multiples of the requested amounts are already received on the wallet. Some victims chose to pay the ransom without waiting for the researchers to study the malware and try to find means to restore files. After the payment, it was necessary to send an email to this email address to receive instructions on decrypting the data. However, soon it became simply useless to pay the ransom, since this address was blocked by the administration of the mail client. Almost instantly, the company's information security specialist confirmed that the cryptographer used the vulnerability of the SEM protocol. An exploit, similar to the Eternal Blue tool stolen from the US National Security Agency, and made publicly available by the Shadow Brokers hacker group to distribute it. Kaspersky Lab analysts also noted that the authors of the malware adopted another tool stolen from the special services exploit Eternal Romance. It was also reported that the extortionist also spread through email spam, hiding inside malicious Office documents, and exploiting the vulnerability of Cove 2017-0199. Subsequently, this virus will be called Petya Notes, that is, NotPetya. The fact is that a year earlier, in March of the 2016 year, users encountered a cryptographer called Petya, also blocked the loading of the computer's operating system and, when it was turned on, demanded to pay a ransom to gain access to the system. In the 2016 year, Petya mainly attacked human resources specialists. To do this, the attackers sent phishing emails of a narrowly targeted nature. The messages were allegedly resumes from candidates for any position. A link to the applicant's full portfolio was attached to the letters, the file of which was replaced on the Dropbox file sharing service. Of course, instead of a portfolio, a virus was located on the link. Running this file caused the system to crash into the blue screen of death and then reboot. After restarting the computer, the victim saw an imitation of checking the check disk, after which it was not the operating system that was loaded on the computer screen at all, but the Petya lock screen. The extortionist informed the victim that all the data on his hard drives were encrypted using a military encryption algorithm, and it is impossible to restore them. To restore access to the system and decrypt the data, the victim had to pay a ransom by going to the attacker's website on the darknet. If the payment was not made within 7 days, the ransom amount was doubled. It was offered to by a special decryption code from the attacker, which had to be entered directly on the locker screen. Information security experts have not yet understood the algorithms of Petya's work, but they came to the conclusion that he did not encrypt the data, but simply blocked the launch of the operating system. However, after purchasing and entering a special key to the users, access to the data was restored. This was the key difference between the old Petya and the new Petya notes. The new virus did not install files in any way after buying a key for $300. These files were irrevocably encrypted already at the moment of restarting the computer, and no one has been able to restore them. The experts who presented the analysis of the cryptographer wrote that after launching the malicious file, a task was created to restart the computer, postponed for 1 or 2 hours. During this time, it was possible to have time to run the bootrec fix ember command to restore the ember and the operability of the operating system. Thus, it was possible to start the system even after its compromise, but it was not possible to decrypt the files. Petya generated his own encryption key for each disk and the U128, which existed in memory until the encryption was completed. After the reboot, this key was deleted. Restoring the contents after completion required knowledge of the private key. In other words, it was impossible to recover the data without knowing the key. Increasingly, it is possible to see that information security experts and the media call the cryptographer not Petya, but Petya notes. Varieties of Petya spots are not yet extra. The fact is that after studying the threat in more detail, experts came to the conclusion that there is not much left of the original Petya in the new cryptographer. The new malware was definitely built on the basis of the source codes of the same Petya. However, the new version was so different from the original that many found it logical to assign it a new name. But most likely the new virus was created by the same people who wrote the extortionist Petya, Misha, and Golden. It's just a new stage of evolution. The specialist, known under the pseudonym de Grack, on the contrary, believed that the new variation of Petya was an unusual extortionist and the brainchild of government hackers. Despite a significant amount of the same code, the original Petya was a criminal enterprise for making money. This new version is definitely not created for the purpose of making money. It is designed to spread quickly and cause damage. And acting under a plausible cover as an extortionist, wrote de Grack. Thus, Petya's music has functionality that allows it to spread to other computers, and this process is avalanche-like. This allows the cryptographer to compromise the domain controller, among other things, and develop an attack before gaining control over all domain nodes, which is equivalent to a complete compromise of the infrastructure. Each registered organization in Ukraine has a unique EPO code, and this is very important. Since using a backdoor for the specified PO, it is possible to conduct a targeted attack against a specific company or organization. Working from the inside from the computer where the Trojan module is installed, you can use different tactics, depending on the intentions of the attackers. Since Medic became widespread, it could be found on the computer of almost every accountant. One Medoc can serve several organizations at once, and once installed, the Trojan will know about all the EDRPs on this machine. To send them to attackers, except for the YAP, the Trojan also collected proxy settings, mail, including logins and passwords of the infected Medoc application. Petya's sheet music had many interesting and unique components. He had one of the trickiest parts highlighted. The Trojan module did not use any external control servers or centers. He used standard updates of the application from the official medoc.com server. The only difference from legal requests was that the Trojan code sent the collected information back to the server via cookies. Most likely, the central update server has been compromised. Therefore, we can only suspect that the attackers were able to patch the update server in order to distinguish requests from infected and uninfected machines and use this in the future. And of course, the attacker had to add a way to control the infected machine. This code received binary data from the official medoc update server. I decrypted them using the CRIPPLED's algorithm, unpacked them from zip, and as a result, an XML file with a set of instructions was obtained, so this Trojan turned into a full-scale platform for hyperespionage and cyber sabotage. On the first day, it became known that Russia and Ukraine were the first to suffer from Petya. So the cryptographer infected the computer systems of the Cabinet of Ministers and the website of the government of Ukraine, mobile operators Kyivstar, Vodafone, and Lifesel, Borispil Airport, the metro in Kiev, the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, a number of banks, and even computers of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. According to the data of the State Agency for the Management of the Exclusion Zone, radiation monitoring was eventually switched to manual mode. It also became known about infections of computers of Rosneft, Bashneft, Tatneft, Magnitogorsk Iron and Steel Works, Models International, Tesa Nivea Mars, and others. But Ukraine has received the greatest harm from the virus. Back on June 27, 2000 of the 17th year, the Ukrainian cyber police reported that, according to preliminary data, the cryptographer on the territory of Ukraine, thanks to the medoc software, Microsoft specialists in turn wrote that on June 27 they noticed that the process of updating medoc's fit. The X started executing malicious commands that led to the installation of Petya. At the same time, a message appeared on the official website of medoc stating that a virus attack was being carried out on the servers. This message soon disappeared and was subsequently only available in the Google cache. On the evening of the 27th of June, representatives of medoc published an official message on their page in the social network, in which they denied their involvement in the distribution of Petya's notes. A month earlier, in May of the 2017 year, the spread of the ransomware virus won the edge was contained, thanks to the efforts of an independent information security specialist. Then the British researcher Maltech discovered a kind of emergency switch in the virus code. Before starting work, the ransomware accessed the domain. You see it on your screens, checking whether it exists. If the domain was not registered, the virus started encrypting files. However, if the domain existed, the ransomware stopped the infection process. The researcher hastened to register this domain, which sharply slowed down its spread to the edge. Unfortunately, no such features were found in the code of Petya's notes. However, Cyber researcher Amit Serper has created a kind of vaccine against Petya's notes. He discovered that you can proactively protect your data by creating a file with a specific name on your hard disk. The fact is that before starting the encryption process, the ransomware checks for the presence of a perf file at the address C Windows. If the file already exists, Petya stops working and does not encrypt the data. Less than 3 hours before the hacker attack began on June 27 at 8:15 in the morning, a car explosion occurred in the Solomensky district, driven by the commander of the Special Purpose Detachment of the Main Intelligence Directorate, Colonel Maxim Shapoval. From a powerful explosion, he died on the spot. At about 10:30, a wave of downloads of medoc updates began, which carried the code of the virus program. In a few hours, the virus has infected a number of government networks. Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, Oleksandr Turchinov, put forward the theory that these two events were linked and constituted a double Russian attack dedicated to the Constitution Day of Ukraine. Almost simultaneously with Ukraine, Rosneft-Bashneft computers stopped working in Russia, which led to a halt in oil production at several sites. And how large Russian enterprises turned out to be protected from the spread of the worm, but not sufficiently protected from infection with it. despite the fact that they hardly used the program to compile Ukrainian tax reports. Following Ukraine and Russia, attacks began to be carried out online in Spain, India, Ireland, the UK, and other countries. About you and us cities. According to McAfee, more infected computers were recorded in the United States than in Ukraine. However, the statistics of the ESET antivirus claims that more than 80% of the recorded infections occurred in Ukraine. After the attack, the construction shops of the Ehetaza ABC company stopped working in Estonia. A day after the attack began, the Department of Cyber Police of Ukraine received more than 1,000 reports of interference in the operation of computer networks, which led to failures in their work. Of these, 43 companies have officially applied to the police. As of the 28th of June, 23 criminal proceedings were initiated on the facts of unauthorized interference in electronic computing systems, both public and private institutions, organizations, enterprises. Article 361 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine. Another 47 facts resolved the issue of entering information into the Unified Register of Pretrial Investigations. As of the 29th of June, 2000 of the 17th year, 1,508 legal entities and individuals addressed the National Police of Ukraine with messages about blocking the operation of computer equipment with the help of a cryptographer virus. 178 of them turned to the police with official statements. In particular, 152 private sector organizations and 26 appeals from the public sector of the country. 115 such facts were registered in the Journal of the Unified Accounting of Committed Criminal Violations and other events. The issue of their legal qualifications was being resolved. According to 63 facts, information was entered into the ERDR under Article 361 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine. In addition, specialists of the Department of Counterintelligence Protection of State Interests in the field of information security of the Security Service of Ukraine were involved in the investigation. Interaction with partner law enforcement agencies, special services of foreign states, and international organizations specializing in cybersecurity was organized. SBU specialists, in cooperation with specialists from the US FBI, the National Crime Agency in the UK, Europol, as well as leading cybersecurity agencies, are taking coordinated joint measures to localize the spread of malicious software NotPetya. The final clarification of the methods of implementing this cyberterrorism action, establishing the sources of the attack, its perpetrators, organizers, and customers. The head of the Cyber Police Department, Sergei Demidyak, said that representatives of the Cyber Police went to the enterprises that announced the virus attack. He also noted that cooperation on eliminating the consequences of virus attacks can go on at the international level. The press secretary of the Security Service of Ukraine, Elena Gitlianskaya, suggested that the attacks were organized from the territory of Russia or from the Donbass. According to Interior Ministry advisor Anton Gerashenko, a massive hacker attack was carried out against the state of Ukraine, using a modified version of the Cryptolocker virus for Ukraine. In his opinion, such an attack was being prepared for at least a month. The ultimate goal of the attack is to destabilize the situation in the economy of Ukraine. Who, in his opinion, was the attacking country? I think there's no point in explaining. On the 4th of July, 2000 of the 17th year, a week after the attack began, in order to immediately stop the spread of the Petya worm, it was decided to conduct searches and seize the company's software and hardware with which the malware was distributed. The searches were conducted by representatives of the Cyber Police Department, investigators, and with the participation of the Security Service of Ukraine. Work computers, personnel, and server equipment were seized, through which the software was distributed. Due to the fact that all Bitcoin transactions are completely public, anyone can see the statistics of transfers to the owner of the virus. New York journalist and programmer Keith Collins created a Twitter account that was automatically updated after each of the operations, and showed the current status of the attacker's account. As of 14:00 on the 28th of June, the attacker received more than $10,000 on the 28th of June. 2000 of the 17th year, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine reported that a large-scale hacker attack on corporate networks and networks of government authorities had been stopped. On June 30th, Secretary of the National Security Council, Turchinov, announced the possibility of using Tor and VPN technologies by attackers. In the first days of July 2000 of the 17th year, the Security Service of Ukraine announced the involvement of the Special Services of the Russian Federation in the attack using the Petya virus. Nationwide, NotPetya literally devoured Ukraine's computers alive. It affected at least 4 hospitals in Kiev alone, 6 energy companies, 2 airports, more than 22 Ukrainian banks, ATMs and card payment systems in various trade and transport, as well as almost all federal agencies. The government was dead, summed up the Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine Volodymyr Amelyan. At least 300 companies were affected, and one senior official of the Ukrainian government estimated that 10% of all computers in the country were reset to zero. The attack even turned off computers that were used by scientists at the Chernobyl disaster relief facility, 100 kilometers north of Kiev. It was a large-scale bombing of all our systems. Within a few hours of its first appearance, the worm broke out of Ukraine and hit countless cars around the world, from hospitals in Pennsylvania to a chocolate factory in Tasmania. He paralyzed multinational companies, including Maersk, pharmaceutical giant Merck, the European division of FedEx TNT Express, the French construction company Saint-Gobain, the food manufacturer Model, and the manufacturer Racket Besser. In each case, he caused losses of 9-digit amounts of dollars and euros. As a result, the total damage amounted to more than $10 billion. American intelligence services also said at the time that the Russian military, the main suspect in any cyberattack aimed at Ukraine, was responsible for launching malicious code. At the same time, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs refused to respond to repeated requests for comments. To get an idea of the scale of damage to Petya's notes, let's consider a fairly large, but more typical attack using a ransomware virus that paralyzed the Atlanta city government. In March of 2018 year, it cost $10 million, is 0.1% of the cost of damage to Petya's notes. Even his more well-known worm, which spread a month before Petya's notes, in May 2000 of the 17th year, according to experts, cost firm $4 to $8 billion, but if we take individual companies, the biggest damage but Petya caused to the transport giant Maersk, whose fiasco with malware clearly demonstrates the danger that cyber warfare now poses a threat to the infrastructure of the modern world. Against the background of this epidemic, one infection has become especially fatal for Maersk. In an office in the port city of Odessa, on the Black Sea coast, the financial director of the Ukrainian division of Maersk asked local IT specialists to install the accounting software Medic on their computer. This gave but Petya the only necessary point of support so that he could expand his activities. The shipping terminal in Elizabeth, New Jersey, one of the 76 terminals that make up the port division of Maersk, known as APM terminals. It is located in Newark Bay, on an artificial peninsula, covering an entire square mile. Tens of thousands of stacked cargo containers cover its vast asphalt landscape, and huge blue cranes hang over the bay. On average, about 3,000 trucks arrive at the terminal every day, each of which has to pick up or unload tens of thousands of tons of everything in the world, from diapers to avocados and tractor parts. Cargo carriers begin this process, as do airline passengers, by checking in at the gate of the terminal, where scanners automatically read the barcodes of their containers, and an employee Myers talks to the truck driver through a loudspeaker. The driver receives a printed pass indicating where to park, so that a huge crane can drag his container from the truck chassis to a stack on the cargo area, where it will be loaded onto a container ship and transported across the ocean. Or the whole process will be done in reverse order. On the morning of the 27th of June, Pavel Fernandez expected that dozens of trucks with cargo would be sent from Elizabeth to the port in the Middle East. Fernandez, the so-called freight forwarder intermediary, who is paid by cargo owners to ensure that their property safely arrives at its destination on the other side of the world. Fernandez is not his real name. Around 9 in the morning, Fernandez's phone began to be torn apart by a series of calls from angry cargo owners. All of them have just heard from truck drivers that their cars are stuck at the Maersk Elizabeth terminal. They could not enter and exit their containers through the gate. Soon, hundreds of 18-wheeled trucks lined up in a queue that stretched 4 miles outside the terminal. One employee at a nearby terminal of another company, in the same port of New Jersey, watched as trucks gathered bumper to bumper. And this chain went far beyond the horizon. A few hours later, without receiving any news from Maersk, the port authority issued a warning that the company's terminal in Elizabeth would be closed until the end of the day. That's when we began to understand. The employee of the neighboring terminal recalled that it was an attack. The police started approaching the drivers in their cabs, ordering them to turn around their huge trucks and get out. Fernandez and countless other distraught Maersk customers were faced with an unpleasant choice. They could try to transfer their precious cargo to other vessels at premium prices at the last minute, or if their cargo was part of a tight supply chain, as a component for the plant. A simple Maersk could mean the need to fork out for exorbitant air transport delivery or the risk of stopping production processes, where one day of downtime costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Many of the containers, known as refrigerated trucks, were electrified and filled with perishable goods requiring refrigeration. They had to be connected somewhere, otherwise their contents would simply rot. The same scenario played out at 17 of the 76 terminals of Maersk. From Los Angeles to Algeciras in Spain, to Rotterdam in the Netherlands, to Mumbai in India. The gates were lowered, the cranes froze. Tens of thousands of trucks could not get to terminals around the world. New orders could not be made, which effectively deprived Maersk of its main source of income from shipping. The computers on the Maersk ships were not infected, but the terminal software designed to receive electronic data exchange files from these ships, which tell terminal operators the exact contents of their huge cargo holds, was completely erased. For several days, one of the most complex and interconnected distributed machines in the world, underlying the circulatory system of the entire global economy, remained broken. It was clear that this problem has a scale that has never been seen before in world transport, recalls one of the views of Maersk. In the history of shipping companies, no one has ever faced a colossal crisis of this magnitude. The Center for the Restoration of the Infrastructure of Maersk has become Med England, where the owners of the conglomerate Myers Group Infrastructure Services are based. The recovery center was managed by the consulting company Deloitte. Maersk, in fact, gave the British firm carte blanche to fix the problem, but Petya, and at any given time. There were up to 200 Deloitte employees in the office in Mahida, as well as up to 400 Maersk employees. All computer equipment used by Maersk before the outbreak of Petya's notes was confiscated due to fears that it could infect new systems. Posters were also posted threatening disciplinary action against anyone who used them. Instead, employees went into all the available electronics stores in Honeyhead and bought mountains of new laptops and prepaid Wi-Fi hotspots. At the beginning of the operation, the department employees who restored the Maersk network came to a painful realization. They found backups of almost all of the individual Maersk servers, dated from 3 to 7 days before the appearance of the notes. But no one could find a backup for one of the most important layers of the company's network, its domain controllers. Firm servers that function as a detailed map of the Maersk network and establish basic rules that determine which users are allowed access and to which systems. About 150 Maersk domain controllers were programmed to synchronize their data with each other. So theoretically, any one of them could function as a backup for everyone else. But this decentralized backup strategy did not take into account one scenario: when all domain controllers are erased at the same time. After a frantic search, during which I had to call hundreds of administrators in data centers around the world, desperate Maersk administrators have finally found the only surviving domain controller in a remote office in Ghana, West Africa. At some point before Petya attacked the notes, a power outage turned off the Ghana machine, and the computer remained disconnected from the network. Thus, it contained the only known copy of the company's domain controller data, untouched by malware. And all thanks to the power outage. However, when the strained engineers at Med set up a connection to the Ghana office, they found that its bandwidth was so weak that it would take days to transfer a backup copy of a domain controller with a volume of several hundred gigabytes to the UK, over a distance of 8,000 kilometers. A new idea popped into my head. Put an employee with a hard drive, with a copy of the system from Ghana, on the next plane to London. But none of the employees of the West African office had a British visa. Therefore, the operation in Maidenhead organized a kind of relay race. One employee from the office in Ghana flew to Nigeria to meet with another employee at the Mayor Airport and give him a very valuable hard drive. The employee then boarded a 6-hour flight to Heathrow. After the rescue operation was completed, the Mayorsk office in Maidenhead was able to start returning the main services to Mayorsk online. After the first days, the port operations of Mayorsk were again able to read the ship inventory files. So operators were no longer blind to the contents of huge ships with 18,000 containers staying in their ports. But it was several days after the initial shutdown before the Maersk firm began accepting orders through maerskline.com for new deliveries. And it took more than a week before terminals around the world began to function in a more or less normal mode. Meanwhile, Maersk employees were working with the tools that were still available to them. They attached paper documents to shipping containers at APM ports and accepted orders through personal accounts, messengers, and Excel spreadsheets. About 2 weeks after the attack, the Maersk network finally reached a point where the company could start transferring personal computers to most employees. The cafeteria in the basement of the building turned into a reinstallation assembly line. Computers were lined up 20 at a time on the dining tables, while the support staff walked through the rows, inserted USB drives, which they cloned by the dozens, and watched the same notifications for hours. A few days after returning from Maidenhead, employees found their laptops in an alphabetical stack of hundreds of machines. Their hard drives have been cleaned up, clean Windows images installed. Everything Myers employees stored locally on their machines, from notes to contacts to family photos, has disappeared forever. 5 months later, Maersk finally recovered from the attack of Petya's notes. Maersk chairman Jim Hagemann Snaby sat on the stage of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, and praised the heroic efforts that were put into the operation to save the companies its systems. He said that since June 27, when he was first woken up by a phone call at 4 in the morning in California, before a scheduled speech at a conference at Stanford, it took the company only 10 days to rebuild its network of 4,000 servers and 45,000 computers. The full recovery took much longer. Some employees at the company in Maida continued to work day and night for almost 2 months to restore the configuration of the Maersk software. "We have overcome the problem thanks to human resilience," he told the audience with us. Since then, Maersk has worked not only to improve its cybersecurity, but also to make it a competitive advantage. Indeed, after Petya's notes, its employees say that almost every security feature they requested was almost immediately approved. Multi-factor authentication has been rolled out across the company, along with the long-delayed upgrade to Windows 10. Employees of the Maersk Security Service said that some of the corporation's servers, up to the attack, were still running Windows 2000. The operating system is so old that Microsoft no longer supported it. In the 2016 year, one group of its department managers insisted on a proactive restructuring of the security of the entire Maersk global network. They drew attention to the imperfect patched Maersk software, outdated operating systems, and, above all, insufficient network segmentation. They warned that it is this latest vulnerability that could allow malware with access to one part of the network to spread widely beyond its original foothold, which is what Petya did the following year. Few companies have paid a higher price for delaying security. In his speech in Davos, Snaby claimed that the company suffered only a 20% reduction in total traffic during the failures of Petya's notes, thanks to its quick efforts and manual workarounds. But in addition to the company's lost business and downtime, as well as the costs of restoring the entire network, Maersk also reimbursed many of its customers for the costs of changing the route or storing their stuck cargo. One client of Maersk said that he received a check from the company for a seven-figure sum to cover the costs of sending his cargo on a charter plane. They paid me a whole million without asking too many questions, he says. In general, according to Snobby's estimates, but Petya cost Maersk from $250 million to $300 million. Most employees suspected that the company's accountants underestimated the figure. It is much more difficult to assess the larger cost of the Maersk failure in the global supply chain as a whole, which depends on the timely delivery of products and production components. And of course, Maersk was just one victim. Merck, whose ability to produce some drugs was temporarily halted by Petya's notes, informed shareholders that it had lost a staggering $870 million due to malicious air defense. FedEx, whose European subsidiary TNT Express was paralyzed in the attack and required an entire month to recover some data, suffered losses in the amount of $400 million. The French construction giant Saint-Gobain lost about the same amount to the Ben Kaiser racket. The British condom manufacturer Durex lost $129 million. And the Modale owner of the Cadbury chocolate manufacturer suffered losses of $188 million. An incalculable number of victims without public shareholders calculated their losses without advertising the amounts. While many in the security community still consider the international victims of Petya's notes collateral damage, Craig Williams' firm CIS claims that the attacker knew perfectly well what kind of pain the worm would cause at the international level. He claims that these consequences were aimed at clearly punishing anyone who dares to even open an office on enemy territory. Williams considers the Russian special services to be the organizer of the attack. Anyone who thinks it was an accident is wishful thinking, Williams says. It was a malicious program designed to send a political message: if you do business in Ukraine, something bad will happen to you. However, almost everyone who has studied Petya's notes agrees on one thing: it could happen again, or even on a larger scale. Global corporations are too closely interconnected. Information security is too complicated. The attack surfaces are too vast to defend against state-trained hackers seeking to release the next worm that will shake the world. But the most persistent object lesson of Petya's notes may simply be the strange, non-spatial landscape of the cyber war battlefield. This is the confusing geography of cyber warfare, in ways that still challenge human intuition. Phantoms inside the medic server room in a dirty corner of Kiev are spreading chaos. In the gilded conference halls of the federal agencies of the capital, in the ports dotting the globe, at the majestic Myers headquarters in Copenhagen Harbor, and throughout the global economy. How does the vulnerability of this Ukrainian accounting software affect the supply of vaccines for us, national security and global cargo transportation? Joshua Corman, a cybersecurity researcher at the Atlantic Council, asks, as if still unraveling the shape of the wormhole that made this causal relationship possible. The physics of cyberspace is completely different from any other field of war. In this physics, Petya reminds us, distance is not a defense. Here the enemy is already at all the gates. And the network of entanglements in this ether, which has united and elevated the world for the last 35 years, can lead it to collapse in a few hours on a summer day.